Let us pray. As Canadians and as Albertans, we give thanks for the precious gifts of freedom and peace which we enjoy. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we rededicate ourselves to the valued traditions of parliamentary democracy as a means of serving our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly His Excellency Edward Ney, Ambassador of the United States, who is here on an official call to the Government of Alberta. He's accompanied by Mr. Bob Cott, United States Consul General in Calgary. They're seated in your gallery, Mr. Speaker, and I would ask that they rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of this Assembly.
Stand.
Presenting petitions.
The member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to present a petition to the Legislative Assembly directing that the government establish province-wide toddler talk programs, which are a program to support mothers and families in their efforts to raise their children. This program has received a great deal of endorsement and success in the West End of Edmonton.
Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions.
Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to give oral notice of my intention to move prior to the calling of the orders of the day, and pursuant to Standing Order 40, the following motion. Be it resolved that this legislature condemns the federal government's plans to impose on Canadians a regressive and inflationary tax on goods and services, and conveys to the Government of Canada the message that a reformed taxation system by which wealthy individuals and corporations pay their fair share of tax is a preferable means of reducing government deficits.
Introduction of bills.
Member for Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to introduce a bill being the Non-Smokers Health Act. This act would ensure the right to clean, smoke-free air for employees in Alberta workplaces with provision for designated smoking rooms with independent air ventilation.
The honourable member for Calgary Buffalo has moved first reading of Bill 255, Non-Smokers Health Act. Those members in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 255, Non-Smokers Health Act, introduced by the honourable member, Mr. Schumer, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, I take pleasure in tabling with the Assembly the 1989 annual report for the Alberta Oil Sands Technology and Research Authority.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Drumheller, followed by Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's my distinct pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly the distinguished representative of the 49th Legislative District of the great state of Louisiana, the Honorable Ted Hike. Mr. Hike is accompanied by his wife and 3 children on his visit to our province, and I would ask Mr. Hike to rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce to you and members of the Assembly 2 out-of-town guests visiting from Richmond, British Columbia, Tom and Laura Jean Nickel. I believe that they're in the public gallery. I'd ask them to stand and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
Minister of Culture and Multiculturalism.
Mr. Speaker, with us today, a gentleman I'd like to introduce to you and the other members of the Assembly is Mr. Bob Maskell, who's the principal of Victoria Composite High School, also the chairman of the Alberta Library Board, a friend of art, culture, and literacy in Alberta, and not incidentally a constituent of Edmonton Park Allen. I'd like him to rise and receive a warm welcome today.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to introduce to you and through you to the members of the legislature two women who are here in support of the petition that I presented earlier. They are Colleen Howe and Isabel Wells, and I ask that they rise in the gallery and receive the welcome of the members of the Legislative Assembly.
The member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche.
Speaker, thank you. On behalf of Mr. Steve Zarewski, member from Redwater, Andrew, who is absent today, I'd like to introduce to you and through you to the Assembly a group of senior citizens, 36 senior citizens, pioneers of Alberta, which I am proud, very proud to introduce. At this time, I'd like to stand, they're seated at the members' gallery, and I would like them to stand up and receive a traditional warm welcome from the Assembly. Thank you. Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, there's absolutely no doubt that Michael Wilson's goods and services tax will be disastrous for Alberta and Alberta families. It's regressive and inflationary. Mr. Speaker, it also invades our jurisdiction over the collection of revenues from oil and gas production. If you like, it's almost the return of the much-hated PGRT. Mr. Speaker, it will take more than $600 out of the pockets of the average Alberta family. But now, Mr. Speaker, the government says it's going to fight Ottawa. Well, people get a little nervous when this government goes to fight Ottawa, Mr. Speaker. Remember the Premier with his fist up going to fight about high interest rates during the provincial election. Came back TKO'd in the first round, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
And it cost Alberta taxpayers a lot of money, Mr. Speaker.
Right.
My question to the Premier then is simply this. Where was the Premier during the federal election when he could have made this a major issue during the campaign and could have had some impact, Mr. Speaker? Why didn't they talk about that?
Mr. Speaker, I think it's clear to everybody in Canada that the government of Alberta has led the fight against the national sales tax. As a matter of fact, as well on the matter of high interest rates. And I must say, Mr. Speaker, that there's a question in terms of the interest rates that we've been able to focus public attention on them, and I believe that has worked on Mr. Crow and the federal government. I believe it's also working in terms of the sales tax.
Oh, yeah?
That's news, Mr. Speaker. Interest rates keep going up.
That's right.
And now they announced that they're going to go ahead with the national sales tax. I want to ask the Premier this again. Instead of holding up Brian Mulroney's hand and Harry Ainley saying he was good for Alberta, why didn't he make this a major issue during the federal campaign?
It was interesting, Mr. Speaker, when the opposition who stressed that free trade would be the #1 issue, and their federal parties as well, that obviously it was so important to the people of Alberta that the province and our government wanted to make sure that that free trade initiative was not lost.
Mr. Speaker, that's an absolute cop-out, and the Premier knows so, Mr. Speaker. But my question to the Treasurer is, Mr. Speaker, he said yesterday that he had some plan, again, to fight Ottawa. Seems to be a secret right now, Mr. Speaker, but will the Treasurer tell us what he intends to do to fight this regressive tax?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Premier's already outlined that starting in the fall of 1988, it was the province of Alberta that consistently, time and time again, took on the issue of the federal sales tax. And I remind the honourable member that while we agree with his position that it was us, the Conservative Party of Alberta, that made it publicly clear what this tax would do to our province. We talked about the inflationary impact, we talked about the impact on interest rates, we talked about the impact on our sector here in Alberta. And as a result, the federal government has now confirmed essentially what we said. And so you see that the outline of that policy was clear. We did take the initiative. We did outline the weaknesses and the challenge to our province if this tax proceeded. And now people of Alberta and the people of Canada understand clearly what is being done. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, other provinces have now joined with the province of Alberta to ensure that jurisdictional questions are protected, to ensure that the protection of their own revenue base is protected, to ensure that intrusion in their own jurisdiction is guarded. That in itself, Mr. Speaker, is a major change, a major inroad, and is in fact the shape of the policy the province of Alberta has outlined some time ago, Mr. Speaker, and it's now about time that the Leader of the Opposition got on side. Far too late, Mr. Speaker, far too late.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
They're doing nothing, Mr. Speaker.
That's right. Yeah, that's what that amounts to.
My second question is to the Premier, Mr. Speaker. This government's credibility has been totally shot with the revelations about what happened with the principal group and how they handled it, Mr. Speaker. We have said right from the time the junior minister, the member from Three Hills, was not making all these major decisions. It was right at the top levels of government, including this Premier, Mr. Speaker, has refused to accept any responsibility. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, in the previous few days, the member from Three Hills has made it clear that the top levels of government were involved, including this Premier, Mr. Speaker. It is now time for this Premier to come clean, accept some responsibility, and tell us what was going on and not hide behind the code report, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. The member from Three Hills said that the task force was disbanded by the Premier and she was removed from her portfolio. To this day, she still doesn't understand why. Nor do Albertans understand why he did these things, Mr. Speaker. Will the Premier now tell us why he moved the minister from the Consumer and Corporate Affairs and disbanded this task force?
Mr. Speaker, it's really strange, the honourable member now quoting second-hand reports on what he thinks somebody said. We did, in fact, have a 2-year inquiry under the Court of Queen's Bench of Alberta, where Mr. Code went in exhaustive detail into all these matters and then provided us with the Code report. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we ordered the Ombudsman to do likewise in terms of looking at the government's role, and that is coming, as I mentioned recently in my response to the Code report. So, Mr. Speaker, to have the Leader of the Opposition now try and draw some red herrings into this issue that has probably in the history of Alberta never had such an exhaustive inquiry.
This Premier stands up day in, day out, not accepting any responsibility. Mr. Hiding behind the member from Three Hills, and she's had it, Mr. Speaker, she's talking. My question is, again, to this Premier, in case he didn't understand the question, why did he move the minister from her portfolio, and more importantly, why did he disband that task force? Did he know something he's not telling the people of Alberta?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, those were all matters covered by the Code inquiry. And the honourable members may not like it, but the inspector did cover them and dealt with them.
Speaker.
Read the report,
Mr.
John.
Speaker, in other words, the Premier knew full well what was going on from the Heinemann memo, and he was making moves, Mr. Speaker, and now he refuses to accept responsibility. That's what's really happening, isn't it? Tell the truth to the people of Alberta.
I can't understand the honourable member's position, Mr. Speaker. These matters were dealt with first by Mr. Code. Presumably they're being dealt with by the Ombudsman. And, of course, I dealt with them myself in the response to the Code report. Now, it's true the Honourable Leader of the Opposition may not be able to comprehend them, but nevertheless, they have all been dealt with.
Order, please. Edmonton Kingsway. We've been through this last week. We're not going through it again this week. Thank you, honourable member. The chair will deal with it without any instructions about settling down. Thank you, honourable member. Member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Mr. Speaker, I think it is true that the longer you wait, the more the truth is known. The former Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs has, in fact, given a second revelation on the principal group fiasco. She has now, or the former minister has informed Albertans that there were in fact 2 task forces, but a new task force that the minister attempted to set up was squelched by the premier. Former minister has also revealed to Albertans for the first time that 2 senior civil servants didn't do their job. My question is to the premier. Given that there were senior civil servants involved in this principal group fiasco that had the responsibility of informing ministers, why hasn't the premier and why hasn't the government taken action with respect to the deputy minister and others that should have been fired for their inaction or negligence on this matter?
Mr. Speaker, the question could only come from a member who has not read the code report.
Exactly.
I'm particularly puzzled by his reference to the 2 members of the public service. They are dealt with in the code report. They're no longer with the government, but they're clearly dealt with in the code report.
Well, I wish you would have read the report, Mr. Premier, and you haven't, sir. Mr. Speaker, my next question is to the Premier. Knowing that there were 2 task forces put into place that were cancelled by the Premier, that's clear from the code report. Why is it that the Premier cancelled or squelched this 3rd task force that the former minister wished to set up with respect to FIC and AIC? A 3rd task force.
Mr. Speaker, the only thing that becomes obvious from the honourable member's questions is that he doesn't know what he's talking about.
That's true. Mr. Speaker, the stonewall continues. Mr. Speaker, the final revelation and the most stinging of all insofar as the Premier is concerned is the fact that the minister asks the Premier to take the blame for his responsibility, for his involvement. Mr. Premier, will you accept responsibility for this fiasco and stop this nonsense of daily questions being put to you on this matter?
He creates a fiasco.
By your own admission.
Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member wants to describe his questions as daily nonsense,
We'll have to do it.
I am perfectly prepared to agree with him. And I would only draw to his attention that, please, no more of these puffballs.
Member for Calgary Fish Creek.
Mr. Speaker, Alberta's gas producers recently concluded a historic vote in support of long-term gas exports to the northeastern United States. These export contracts would see 350 million cubic feet of gas daily flowing through the proposed Iroquois pipeline for sale to 18 distribution companies in Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Can the Minister of Energy detail for the Assembly the implications of this export development for petroleum industry activity in the province?
Mr. Speaker, I noticed that maybe some of the MLAs from Edmonton may not be interested in the opposition, but I'm certainly the MLA for Calgary is interested because the level of activity in the province has been a concern to us all, and I think that it should be shared by the NDP. Mr. Speaker, this is an initiative that is welcome in the industry. As I have just indicated, there has been a low level of activity in the province, and it has concerned us as a government, but we recognize that the level of activity in a large part was due to the constraints on pipeline capacity out of this province into new markets.
And I should also point out that this initiative is probably one of the most significant economic initiatives that has hit this province this year, Mr. Speaker, and it will play a role, I hope and I believe, in increased activity within the industry. We tend to overlook the nature of this initiative, Mr. Speaker, because of our focus on diversification and because of the complexity of this particular industry. But, Mr. Speaker, this project, as the Honourable Member for Fish Creek pointed out, is a major initiative, and it affects long-term contracts for Alberta Natural Gas into a new market, the Northeast, and the industry welcomes it with open arms.
As encouraging as these export developments are, however, Mr. Speaker, can the minister speak to the concerns that many Albertans have as to our gas reserves? Are they in fact sufficient to support the Iroquois project and the major potential export opportunities now on the drawing board?
Mr. Speaker, one of the questions that does come up, of course, and it's a good one, and that is the amount of reserves in Alberta for natural gas in the context of major pipeline projects into the U.S. This particular project, Mr. Speaker, which the member pointed out was 350 million cubic feet a day of gas, is well within Alberta's capabilities. We have in this province, some would say, in excess of 200 trillion cubic feet of established and prospective reserves for natural gas. Certainly, now that we have pushed this surplus bubble through the pipeline and into a new marketplace for Alberta natural gas, it will increase the activity that will replace those reserves. Certainly, there's no activity, Mr. Speaker, when the pipelines were full and there was no opportunity for new natural gas sales, but it is well within our capabilities. Now, with respect to other pipeline projects, we have equally exciting projects into the Midwest and California. Whether or not Alberta reserves can support all of those projects, Mr. Speaker, will something that we will watch very closely and will be involved in the determination thereof in the near future. But certainly this project, together with some of the others on the drawing boards, are very encouraging for the industry. And
in a time, Mr. Speaker, when all governments, including our own, are facing significant revenue pressures, can the Minister of Energy or perhaps the Provincial Treasurer indicate to the Assembly the government's expectations of royalty revenues associated with these additional gas exports?
Mr. Speaker, the royalty revenues are one aspect of it. There is another aspect of it, and that's the economic impact of pipeline facilities within the NOVA system, within the province of Alberta, and the expansion that TransCanada Pipelines will be embarking on outside of this province into the United States market. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, it's in the range of about $1.5 to $2.5 billion of pipeline construction that will result from this initiative together with other initiatives for new natural gas markets. To directly answer his question, Mr. Speaker, in 1991, this will result in about $310 million worth of natural gas sales to the United States, and in that respect, the royalty revenues in 1991 will be about $75 million per year, depending on price at the particular time. These are 10 to 15-year contracts, Mr. Speaker. You can see that it is well in excess of $800 to $1 billion of royalty revenue over the life of these contracts, something very significant to the economic future of this province.
Edmonton Jasper Place, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Applied Polymer Group of Edmonton has produced at least 5 different end products from waste plastic pop bottles, which are collected under the Beverage Container Act. On July 28th, the principal owner of Applied Polymer, Cliff Rondon, met with the Executive Assistant to the Minister of the Environment, Mr. Rod Love, and Mr. Jim Armet of the Office of the Minister of Economic Development. The meeting discussed the fact that there's no provincial assistance available to this company, which has invested some $25 to $30 million to date. I think there was a loan guarantee a few years back, which was paid in full. The 2 executive assistants promised that, they were informed that Vencap had been offered 80% of the shares in the company for $6.5 million. The assistants offered that the ministers would light a fire under Vencap to get an answer out of them. Well, 0 hour passed, the company closed, and there's still no answer out of VENCAP. I wonder if either minister could inform the House as to what became of the fire that was to be lit under VENCAP.
Mr. Speaker, what we did do, as the honourable member indicated, after the principals met with the executive assistant of the Minister of Environment and my own, we had communications with VENCAP. They indicated that they wished additional financial information from the principals of the company so that they could do a thorough assessment. They had indicated their regret, though, that they could not do it in a time period of which had been requested of them. But VENCAP is very much willing to look at this proposal, as it is the type of endeavor that they would like to involve themselves in the event that they had the proper financial information that they could work from.
It's hard to accept. VENCAP's been on this for 2 or 3 years at this point in time. 0 hours past, the company's closed. I wonder if the minister would explain why it is that the petrochemical industry, which produces a similar product using raw resources, gets hundreds of millions of dollars in feedstock subsidies free of charge, but this company can't sell 80% of their shares to a provincial agency for $6.5 million.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the honourable member would wish VENCAP, which is arm's length from the government, or ourselves to do a thorough assessment, because as has been the case in the past, in the event that we do have some companies that do not do as well as others, we face some certain criticisms from the opposition members for our involvement. And we want to make sure that we do it on a sound economic base when we do involve ourselves by way of loan guarantees or investment purposes with various companies. We're very much willing to work with this company. It's sad that they come to us at the last minute rather than working with us prior to this time period, but we're still going to follow through and see if there's any way that we possibly can be helpful to them.
Supplementary to the Minister of the Environment, then, I appreciate that the Minister may have some difficulty establishing his recycling strategy when there's no recycling industries left in the province, but I wonder if he's going to stand by and allow this material to be landfilled in a dump when it could be manufactured into a valuable material by an Alberta-based company.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would like some time to assess the situation. As the Honourable Minister pointed out, the principals of the company spoke to officials from my department for the first time on Thursday. As a matter of fact, it was 2 o'clock on Thursday afternoon in room 410. And they asked for $6 million at that particular time and said that they had to have it by Tuesday, and I think my executive assistant said that he didn't have his checkbook with him. And you just can't do things that fast, and we would like to assess the situation. We would like to work with these people in a reasonable fashion. We would like not to adhere to the NDP philosophy of turning large fortunes into small fortunes and do things in a reasonable fashion.
Thank you.
Westlock Sturgeon, followed by Red Deer North.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Environment, which I gave him notice about this about 3 weeks ago, so should be ready, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is aware, I'm sure, about the fish kill in the Wabash Creek here, just near Westlock here, about a month ago by the dumping of Westlock's sewage settling pond into the creek. The Minister is probably also aware, Mr. Speaker, that as of 1985, there are over 300 towns in Alberta that are authorized by his department to dump retention ponds once or twice a year into the creeks. That's 81% of the sewage facilities in this province. Now, given that my question is, given that our farmers, our rural people are starting to get pretty fed up with this environment allowing sewage to be dumped in our creeks and river and streams, when is the minister going to order a halt to the dumping of raw sewage ponds?
I really don't know, Mr. Speaker, when I'm going to issue an order calling for a halt to that particular situation until we've had a chance to examine it in detail. There's a situation in the city of Edmonton, for instance. Because of lack of attention paid to the development of an adequate sewer system in this particular municipality, the city in times of heavy rains is forced to dump raw sewage into the North Saskatchewan River. And there are different circumstances for different municipalities. And the honourable member from Westlock Sturgeon is well aware of the situation in that particular area. I've provided him with a report on the situation, and he knows full well the reasons for the discharge of sewage at particular times into the creek that he mentions.
Mr. Speaker, I had brought some dead fish, but remembered how you didn't like it last year. I didn't try to bring it in here. But the point, Mr. Speaker, then, if this government can find funds for the large cities of Calgary and Edmonton and some of the other ones in the province to treat their sewage so that it doesn't ruin the rivers, why cannot this government find the same funds to keep the towns from dumping into our streams and creeks around our farm areas?
Mr. Speaker, I believe it's a matter of economy of scale. And one of the solutions, and it's a long-term solution, and it's going to cost lots of dollars, and it's going to involve the cooperation of municipalities and municipal districts, is to create a regional system of water distribution and sewage discharges. And that has to be the long-term solution. In the meantime, we will have to cope with individual municipal problems as they occur.
Given, Mr. Speaker, that over 300 out of the 370 systems we have in Alberta are now dumping sewage, should not the minister consider either pipelining this into a central location or using truck transportation to move the effluent to treatment plants rather than dumping them out onto the land?
Mr. Speaker, obviously the honourable member wasn't listening to the answer to his first supplementary. I told him that the ultimate solution is a regional system where, in fact, sewage from municipalities would be dumped in a central location. And when it can be developed, yes.
Thank you. Red Deer North, followed by Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. In the last year, the government has pursued a policy of providing loan guarantees to the meatpacking industry. The supposed purpose of this policy was to provide a framework for the industry, carrying it into the 21st century. And part of that strategy involved a $20 million loan guarantee to the farmer-owned Fletcher's operation. Can the minister indicate to us today whether any of those amounts have actually been drawn down, or has this been strictly a cosmetic policy?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is correct, whereby we have involved ourselves in making sure that we do have a world-class food processing sector within the province of Alberta so that we can have those added benefits flow through to our primary producers. Yes, there has been a drawdown on the loan guarantee for Fletcher's, the purpose of which, so hopefully we will have greater markets for the hogs that are produced within this province. In addition to that, the creation of additional jobs in the Red Deer area.
To the Minister of Agriculture, can the minister advise then whether the Fletcher's facility in Red Deer is now capable of handling any unexpected increase in demand on the operations that may accrue?
Mr. Speaker, it's my understanding that from a capacity viewpoint, with little additional expenditure, Fletcher's could handle 500 hogs per hour, up to 16 hours a day, which, if you do a little bit of mathematics, would be the Alberta hog production. From a desirability viewpoint, our producers are very interested in slaughter plants closer to home, and hence the retention of an Edmonton area slaughter facility is very important to northern producers, and the moving ahead of the proposed Picture Butte plant is very important to southern producers.
Calgary Mountain View, followed by Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The specter of the Conservative provincial treasurer criticizing Michael Wilson over the new federal Conservative sales tax is like the coyote pointing his finger at the fox for raiding the chicken coop. They're both making the tax system more unfair, Mr. Speaker, for average Canadians and average Albertans. When Alberta Conservatives came to power in 1971, individuals and corporations shouldered roughly equal shares of the tax burden, but that's changed completely today. Once the tax credits corporations receive are deducted, companies shoulder only about 5% of Alberta's tax burden. Ordinary working Albertans are left to pick up the rest. Given that since he became treasurer, average families have been burdened with over $1,000 in new taxes each year, and given that even just a 1% increase in the tax rates for larger corporations would net the province over $30 million annually, why hasn't the provincial treasurer restored some fairness to the tax system by making such a change?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, the member doesn't understand the simple mathematics of proportions. I've tried to explain it to him time and time again, but if you have in a pool 2 red marbles and 1 green marble, the ratio is 1 to 2, 1/3, 2/3. Should you subtract the 1 red marble, you now have 100% green marbles, Mr. Speaker. The law of proportions holds, and so you can see that if you change the equation, obviously you're going to find that the proportion paid in terms of personal income tax or corporate income tax changes. Now, what we've had in Alberta, Mr. Speaker, is that corporations have gone through a very difficult period here in Alberta with losses, and as a result, those tax losses have been carried forward under the tax legislation. That is quite appropriate. And the second thing that's happened, Mr. Speaker, is because of the strength of our economy and more people that work in our economy and higher incomes, Mr. Speaker, people are paying higher personal taxes. Now, that's what's happened here in this province. But overall, we have maintained the most equitable tax regime of any province in Canada. The lowest personal taxes, 500,000 Albertans exempt from taxation on a personal selective basis, and no sales tax, Mr. Speaker. No sales tax. Now, Mr. Speaker, the combination of that is clear. It is the best province to live in with respect to the tax regime. The numbers are working to our...
Thank you. Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With a $10 billion debt, it's obvious the provincial treasurer has lost all his marbles. Given that in the United States, Mr. Speaker, a minimum corporate tax is put back on the tax rolls, many profitable corporations who paid no tax for many years, and given that a minimum tax of 20% on the profits of larger companies in Alberta could generate $200 million for the cash-strapped provincial treasurer, why has the provincial treasurer not restored tax fairness in Alberta by bringing in a minimum corporate tax?
Right on.
Well, there again, Mr. Speaker, it's words of this order that would drive the investment from this province. If those socialists ever had a moment of government, Mr. Speaker, the kinds of investment vigor that we now see in this province would be driven once and for all from our province, Mr. Speaker. Right. That's the kind of economic fiscal regime that the socialists will bring to this province, and that's why, Mr. Speaker, it's so important for us in Alberta to remember that it's the private sector that drives our economy. It's the level investments that generates jobs. Now, you never hear the socialists across the way talking about jobs, Mr. Speaker, when they talk about taxation. We want to talk about jobs, because it's jobs that are coming to this province as a result of our fiscal plan. It's the confidence that the private sector has here, Mr. Speaker, because of our tax regime, and it's happening. Now, the Blues brothers over there don't like it, Mr. Speaker. They don't want to see the economy performing. They don't want to see the good news, Mr. Speaker. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. They should go back and scurry under the rocks they came out of, Mr. Speaker.
And let the working people shoulder the burden is what you meant to add on.
There's an interesting problem with the line of questioning in view of the member for Calgary Mountain View's notice understanding Order 40 later in the afternoon, but we allow it to continue. Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
This has to do with income tax.
Given that the government's wealthy corporate friends, such as Don Cormier, have lots of money to give to conservative election and leadership campaigns, Mr. Speaker, is this a real reason why this government refuses to require large, profitable corporations to shoulder their fair share of the tax burden?
Yes.
Well, there again, Mr. Speaker, we see the fallacy of their arguments. You know, it's an amazing point that in 1985, 25% of the total corporate tax paid in Canada was paid by Alberta corporations. 25% of the total corporate tax paid in Canada was paid by Alberta corporations, Mr. Speaker.
1 in 4.
Just think about that for a second. Is that to show that we are not taxing corporations? In fact, in the 1987 budget, we increased the corporate tax rates by something like 35%. But still, Mr. Speaker, you have to allow the private sector an opportunity to invest. You have to have them opportunity to generate new jobs, and you have to give them the freedom of choice, Mr. Speaker. Ideas which are not known to the socialists across the way. But let me state again that this province has benefited substantially by the private sector activity which is head officed here, and it is a matter of fact that in 1985, 25% of the total corporate tax paid in Canada was paid by Alberta corporations.
Calgary Buffalo, followed by Clover Bar. Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is to the provincial treasurer who talks like Rambo on speed but acts like Bambi. Now, Mr. Speaker, after making a speech in which he supported the new federal sales tax if it raised money for the deficit, the credibility of the provincial treasurer is approaching 4/5 of 5/9 of zero when he states that he opposes and will fight the sales tax. Now we see that Alberta is going to be hit harder than most provinces, that the tax will be hidden rather than disclosed, and that also the government has a variety of reports on the issues which have been paid for by public money which he is hiding from Albertans. Now I'd like to ask the provincial treasurer why we should have any confidence that the minister can lead the opposition to this sales tax when he has publicly stated that he favors the tax if it raises revenue for the deficit. Is he for the tax or is he against it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think you could ask all Canadians where Alberta stands on this issue. You could certainly ask all provincial governments where Alberta stands on this issue, and you can ask all Albertans where this government stands on this issue, Mr. Speaker. The answer would be very clearly in clear opposition to that tax. Now, it's interesting, Mr. Speaker, that the member from Buffalo over there from Calgary Buffalo, raises the question about which party stands for what. I just happen to have here something from the leaderless Liberal Party. Decor says VAT not bad, Mr. Speaker. Decor says VAT not bad. Now, Mr. Speaker, if you ask me, the Liberal Party is in favor of this intrusive tax by the federal government. They're the ones who would allow the small individual businessmen to be put under this terrible strain of this tax, Mr. Speaker, and they're the ones who would allow that to happen. Now, they're the ones who have not clarified their position. It's interesting the member from Buffalo, who speaks from both sides of his face, doesn't know exactly what his party stands for.
Nor does his leader. Well, the minister has us all buffaloed, Mr. Speaker. One thing that this government can do is make sure that the tax is not hidden. I'm wondering now whether the provincial treasurer is prepared to commit to ensure that provincial legislation requires that the sales tax be disclosed in all transactions in this province. Will you do that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, since 1986, the member from Calgary Buffalo and I find an idea that we can agree on. It is, in fact, important, I think, that that tax be revealed, to be disclosed. But again, in reading Mr. Wilson's paper yesterday, I must say I'm confused as to what the outcome will be. On one hand, he says it will be a hidden tax, and on the other hand, he says it must be disclosed. I'm not too sure yet just what the outcome will be, but we do strongly advocate that this tax be upfront and very visible.
We can agree that the minister's confused, and I'm wondering how this minister can have the nerve, and why does the government consistently insult Albertans by hiding information from them, and will he now make public the many reports that he has which have been paid for by the money of the people of this province?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I think we have done our best, certainly from the province of Alberta. The government has taken the stand consistently through 1988, talking about the inflationary impact of this tax, about the negative impact on certain sectors within the provincial economy, about the fact that it's a tax grab, Mr. Speaker, that there will be distortions to our western regional provinces' economy. We have taken the time, Mr. Speaker, to outline these concerns. And now I think the federal government's policy has confirmed our position. Grudgingly, I agree, Mr. Speaker, but we did take the time to outline what we saw to be the weaknesses in the tax. Other provinces now have joined with us in this argument, and I'm sure that when the Premier goes to the Premier's Conference sometime this month, there'll be an opportunity for them to talk about it as well, and we will see what it is the provinces intend to do. But in terms of providing information, no province has been stronger in its criticism of this tax. No government has outlined more specifically the economic impact of this tax, and no province has taken the time to clearly speak to the various sectors of our province as to what the tax may do. We have taken the lead, we have provided the ideas, we have provided the information, and we have taken the lead in the opposition, Mr. Speaker.
Clover Bar, followed by Calgary Forest Lawn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask about jobs, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Technology, Research and Telecommunications, and perhaps the Minister of Economic Development and Trade might want to supplement the answer. Last Friday, Sheriff Gordon, in conjunction with the federal and provincial government, made a major announcement about West Aim.
Repeat the announcement.
Recent statistics, the employment report, the labor force survey for July 1989 indicates that the northeast area, which includes Clover Bar, has the highest unemployment rate in Alberta. Fort Saskatchewan has decreased in population over the last number of years, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, how many jobs will be created by West Aim and over what period of time?
Mr. Speaker, I think it's very fitting that the honourable member raises that matter with respect to jobs and opportunities and confidence in Alberta as a pickup from what the provincial treasurer has been saying. Because indeed, the announcement that was made on Friday is a very major announcement for Alberta and for the opportunities that would be created in Alberta in the area of advanced industrial technologies and materials. As to jobs created, actually, under applied research and development, it's not a labor-intensive type of object, or at least of industry. However, it's estimated that over the 5 years, there will be created about 200 jobs in applied research and development. Those are skilled jobs, technicians and scientists, that will create great opportunities for our young people. About 160 of those will be in West Aim directly, and about 40 will be from spin-offs from the commercialization of the technologies. Actually, in extending out further, it's estimated that about 3,000 jobs will be created through construction and indirect spin-offs, utilization of the technology in universities and further research there, as well as an Alberta Research Council. Sheriff itself has estimated that in the longer term, over perhaps 20 years, we could see as many as 20,000 jobs created in this province. So it's a very significant undertaking, cooperative effort between the federal government, the provincial government, and industry on a market-driven basis. And I thank the honourable member for his assistance.
No, thank you. Order, please. Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How much money is our government contributing towards West Aim, and what will be the securities that will be in place?
Mr. Speaker, the provincial government will be contributing $30 million over 5 years to research and development. In addition, $10 million towards research infrastructure, a facility for the research and development in Fort Saskatchewan, the honourable member's constituency. That's the contribution. As to the security that's there, it goes into research and development, which will be assessed on a project-by-project basis. It will be evaluated by a technical committee in which we're represented. It will be monies going to a distinct company, not Sheriff Gordon, but West Aim, in which we will also have a position on the board of directors. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, there will be an agreement entered into between all three parties, which will secure the whole process from the basic research right through the commercialization stage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to direct my final question to the Minister of Health. With this growth impact in Fort Saskatchewan in the total region, will the Minister outline her strategy to meet the expected associated demand for health services? Will you take another look at that?
Nice move, Mr. Speaker. Of course, any change in terms of population distribution, the demographic realities of our province, particularly with the huge diversification efforts which we are taking as a province, are factored in to the healthcare planning strategy. And those change, Mr. Speaker, and have to continue to be factored in, and that will certainly be the case with respect to this wonderful project going into the Fort Saskatchewan area.
Calgary Forest Lawn, followed by Calgary McKnight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The proposed amendments to the Alberta Energy Act contained in Bill 15 will make it possible for American and other foreign investors to own large blocks of shares in the company. When I asked the Premier on Friday why this was happening, he answered simply that conditions change. So my question is to the Premier, Mr. Speaker. Can the Premier tell us exactly what conditions have changed that now make it necessary to ensure Americans and other foreign ownership of Alberta Energy Company shares? What makes it so necessary now?
As I also told the honourable member when he raised this issue, Mr. Speaker, that legislation that comes before the House progresses in an orderly manner. There are 3 readings of that legislation and committee study, and I urge the honourable member to participate in it as fully as he wishes.
He will, but why don't you participate now? It's your opportunity. It doesn't matter.
This is an urgent matter, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Energy, then, given that the Petroleum Monitoring Agency has called the increase in foreign control of Canadian oil and gas resources the main feature of the petroleum industry last year, is the Minister not concerned that this bill will only worsen the situation and take even more control of our energy resources out of the hands of Albertans and other Canadians and into those of Americans and other foreign...
Mr. Speaker, let me assure the honourable member that there is control is going nowhere. Companies must register in Canada or in Alberta. They must go to the Energy Resources Conservation Board for a drilling permit. They must buy a crown lease from the province of Alberta. They must then get a removal permit to remove the gas from the province. And if it goes outside of the country, Mr. Speaker, they must get an export permit. I think that there is a pretty strong ownership in the hands of the provincial government as gatekeepers for the province's resources. I just don't understand the honourable member's question.
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Finals.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary then to the Minister of Energy. Given that so many Alberta-owned energy resources, such as those at Suffield and Primrose, were transferred to Alberta Energy Company at prices well below market values, why would the government wish to hand to non-Canadians such benefits from Alberta's valuable declining resources?
Indeed.
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member would care to review the history of the Alberta Energy Company Act or look into the annual report of that company, he would see that, in fact, to date, the holders of the shares in Alberta Energy Company are Albertans and Canadians. So if those Albertans and Canadians wish to realize on their assets and dispose of them through the marketplace, then that is readily available. Mr. Speaker, this is a company that competes worldwide, not just in oil and gas exploration and production, but in the area of forest products and pipelining. It is a major player internationally. And for it to continue to grow and to be viable and to compete on an international scale, it must have access to international markets for equity investment. We are allowing that opportunity. The honourable member seems to have a concern with the level of foreign ownership, which under the bill is set at 10%. Should let the honourable member know that Canadian chartered banks are about 25%, as are cable companies. It is less than half of Pacific Western Airlines or Air Canada. So we are well below the acceptable level in Canada for foreign investment in publicly controlled or publicly oriented companies. So there should be no concern in the honourable member's mind, Mr. Speaker.
There's a request by Calgary Mountain View Understanding Order 40.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I previously gave oral notice of motion. I believe the actual motion or notice of motion has been circulated to all members of the legislature this afternoon. I'd like to speak only to at this point, to the urgency of of us debating this resolution this afternoon. I don't anticipate that there would be any argument over the fact that this new federal tax will be both regressive and inflationary and harm Albertans. It was only yesterday, however, Mr. Speaker, that we were provided with the first definitive details of this tax, and it turns out to be worse than had been anticipated. It may well be a hidden tax, as an example, and it will be applied to very many, in fact, not almost all, transactions financial transactions once it's implemented. It's important that this legislature send a strong message now to the federal government in order that the federal finance minister will not ever in the future be able to say no one objected strongly to this tax and therefore he proceeded with it. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's to come into effect in January 1991, and on the surface it may appear that this would leave the Assembly and others lots of time to have input into this tax. But that time frame is deceptive, Mr. Speaker. We have given to us very little time in which to influence events. The long lead time in making these announcements are necessary in order to gear up on the part of the federal government and on the part of businesses across the country to take into account the highly complex nature of this tax. And so while it will be implemented some way down the road, the crucial decisions are going to be taken very, very shortly, and only speedy, immediate action by the legislature will send a message strong enough to get the federal government to abandon this tax, assuming, of course, that the legislature wants the federal government to abandon this tax. If it's the Alberta legislature is determined to stop this tax, then in my view only immediate open action will be effective, which means that today in the final last few days or the last week or so available to us in this sitting, we need to debate this issue and pass the motion in front of us. Further, Mr. Speaker, if the provincial government intends on lobbying the federal government, and we're not aware of that, the provincial treasurer says that he has a secret strategy. Whether it's a secret strategy or a hidden agenda, I don't know. But if they're to lobby the federal government, then it seems to me that it would be only prudent that the government of Alberta should take with them the benefit of debate and advice which they could get from the members of this legislature only in the form of debate this afternoon on this motion in open session here in the legislature. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't anticipate that it would take a lot of debate, but those are certainly what I hope to be compelling reasons why we need to deal with this matter on an urgent basis.
Right on.
Under Standing Order 40, the Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View is now making the request to the House for unanimous consent to carry out debate. With respect to granting unanimous consent, those in favour please say aye. Aye. Opposed please say no. No. Request fails. Orders of the day. Orders of the day.
Committee of Supply.